It does appear, though, based on what we heard from today and read specifically from Donald Trump on Truth Social, that's all we're going to get.
And he made it pretty clear in all caps that there would not be a third debate. It was something that his campaign reiterated, in case you didn't get the message. He had flirted yesterday with the idea of maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't, maybe on Fox, which the Harris campaign had ruled out already, maybe on NBC. But thinking about it from a strategy standpoint, the risk outweighs the reward for Trump in doing a rematch with Kamala Harris. The first debate that he had with Joe Biden was actually not that great for Trump anyway. It was papered over by Biden's epically poor performance, the one that ultimately caused him to drop from the race. But Trump on Tuesday night really showed that he was not prepared to go toe-to-toe with the former prosecutor.
Well, that's saying a lot for somebody who's done more of these presidential general election debates than literally anyone. And it looks like this is all that we're going to get here. So early voting begins. As I mentioned, North Carolina was supposed to be already at it before the debate. Their absentee ballots were delayed because of a lawsuit by RFK Jr. trying to get himself off the ballot. So Alabama moves up to number one, and Pennsylvania is on Monday. This has become a critical part of the campaign strategy.
Well, Joe, we are now in election mode, and this is the final sprint for the candidates. And it is urgent for them to get their message out there very clearly and as widely as possible. And in a way, Trump deciding not to do a third debate deprives Kamala Harris of one more opportunity to introduce herself to voters and to clarify any policy questions about her that they might have. But it also robs him of a chance to speak to a broader audience than the very loyal one that he addresses in smaller form at his rallies. Yeah. So it really does come down to now getting that message out and going state to state as they're doing.
Michael Shepard, important moment today at the White House. It falls right in line with your area of expertise here as we see Jensen Huang from NVIDIA, Sam Altman from OpenAI at the White House talking with administration officials about what they need. That starts with infrastructure and power. What role does the administration play in this critical point of the evolution of AI?
Well, industrial policy has been a centerpiece of President Joe Biden's agenda since he took office. We saw the CHIPS and Science Act and the Inflation Reduction Act signed and enacted in 2022, and each was geared to promote semiconductor manufacturing, and that is geared toward artificial intelligence, which is the vanguard of the new tech wave that we're seeing right in our face. We saw OpenAI introduce its new Strawberry model today. This is, the cutting edge of tech. NVIDIA is benefiting enormously from the AI revolution, shifting its production from gaming chips and processors to equipment geared for AI. Now, the energy component comes in because none of this works unless you have data centers, and they have to be really big, and they have to be able to do many functions to test those language models, right. And that requires a lot of energy. And to make any of the administration's plans for, boosting domestic manufacturing and making America, keeping America's place as a tech leader globally, it will depend on all of that infrastructure for energy for this.
I wonder to what extent Democrats and Republicans will start warming up to the idea of nuclear power as these demands grow at data centers. Michael, thank you, as always, for the insights. Bloomberg's Michael Shepard with us in Washington. As we turn to the economy today, another big day today with the PPI out, Producer Price Index, in this morning, mostly in line with expectations. The core at 2.4% year over year, overall 1.7%. Data appearing to firm up 25 basis points for an interest rate cut at the Fed's meeting next week. No one knows more than Bloomberg's Kate Davidson, who runs our Fed coverage here in Washington. Kate, thanks for being with us. This essentially reinforces what we thought on CPI Day yesterday.
Yeah, basically, Joe. I mean, it's good news for the Fed. This is just broadly, things are going in the direction that the Fed wants to see. But I think, as we've talked about, their eye really now is on the labor market, and I think that is really what's going to drive the size and the pace of the rate cuts going forward. So the data today showed prices, continuing to cool. They picked up just only slightly, but the categories that feed into the Fed's preferred inflation gauge, which is the personal consumption expenditures price index, those were positive. So just kind of keeps them on track for that quarter-point cut. And whether they decide down the line or, maybe even next week, and they haven't had the meeting yet. Maybe if they do weigh whether to go for a bigger cut next week or in the coming months, it's going to depend on how worried they are about the labor market. And they're not going to get any more data about that before their meeting that starts on Tuesday.
Interesting. The market sees 25 then, and I guess we'll talk about this again next week. In the meantime, though, some worries about the job market slowing down more than some might have seen toward the end of this year. We saw jobless claims up a little more than expected today. So just a few weeks ago, Jay Powell described the job market as being in balance. How long does that last before you worry?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. It's kind of at the heart of this economic debate is you're at this point where the jobless rate is starting to tick up. And historically what happens is once that starts, it can go quite quickly. And you just don't know how quickly it's going to happen. But then again, we are in this post-pandemic period where the economy is so different in so many ways. It's really defied expectations for the last few years. So that is what Fed officials are wrestling with. Is it's going to look like kind of a traditional economic cycle? If you look at what's happening with growth, and other sectors of the economy, this is what Fed officials are saying is there's not really any alarm bells going off. Yes, the labor market is cooling, maybe a little more than they expected, like you said, but there aren't a lot of other signs that are overly worrisome, which is, again, why they're going to go for that smaller cut, I think we expect next week.
Will Jay Powell, though, chart a course when he talks to reporters next week for cuts through the end of the year, or do we stay data dependent and go meeting by meeting?
Well, we have the benefit of getting their updated forecast. Fed officials, every 4 times a year they release their summary of economic projections. That's not a committee exercise. They don't all agree on it. They each, as individuals, will say, here's what I think is going to happen. So, we tend to think of it as them penciling in, and Jay Powell will repeatedly remind us on Wednesday, hey, this is not a plan. This isn't us promising what we're going to do. But everyone's going to look at what those forecasts say and going to make assumptions about, okay, this is what they're ready to do. But I think when it comes down to it, what actually happens at the meetings, he will say, is a data-dependent decision. I'm sure he will stick to that.